Hallå, hallå! Hej, jag heter Martin Smedjeback och är aktiv i Djurrättsorganisationen. Mycket välkomna hit till den här presentationen med McArthur. Det är jättekul att kunna introducera Joanne som under 15 år har jobbat som fotograf för djurrätt i djurrättens tjänst. Hon har tagit bland annat många bilder till Djurrättsorganisationen och till otaliga djurrättsorganisationer runt om i världen. Kanske några här kan ju kolla med er. Hur många har sett den här fantastiska dokumentärfilmen Ghost in Our Machine? Vill ni hålla upp handen? Okej, det är några stycken. Den finns också att titta på som en inblick i hur Joanne jobbar runt om i världen. Inte nog med att det finns en film, det finns också en bok som heter We Animals, som består av foton som Joanne har tagit under många år av djur och djurrättsarbete. Den finns att köpa i Djurrättsorganisationens lilla monter som är här utanför, tror jag, någonstans. Och man kan få den signerad av Joanne. Hon kommer att finnas där under stora delar av dagen, om jag har förstått det rätt. Så ta gärna den chansen. Jag tror det räcker. Ha det så trevligt. Och Joanne, I'm very glad to introduce you and welcome.
This is such a big crowd. I'm so happy to see everyone here. I think he asked you how many people had seen the ghosts in our machine. Is that right? Can I have a show of hands again? Okay, so that's how you know about this project. And some of you just know about We Animals, is that right? Do any of you have no idea what you're in for right now? Oh good, that's great. Okay, well, thank you for coming on this journey with me. This will be a journey for the next 45 minutes or so. And here we go. Look, good. I dedicate all of my talks to Ron. This is Ron. He was a chimpanzee used in research. He was kept in a 5 by 5 by 7 foot cage for most of his life before he was rescued. So this talk is dedicated to Ron, and I'll tell you more about his story at the end of the presentation. Now I put animals in 3 categories. And the first category is pets. These are animals we share our lives with. We know them very well. Cats, dogs, small animals. We even share our food and our home, and we even share our beds with them. But this isn't the category of animals that I photograph for the most part. The second category of animals is the wildlife, the megafauna, the charismatic animals who we see on the cover of National Geographic. We're familiar with them, we revere them for their beauty, we donate money to save them from being endangered, but basically we have no relationship with these animals. It's a very arm's length relationship to them. Now the animals that I photograph, that I've spent 15 years around the world, all 7 continents, documenting, are the invisible animals in our lives. And yet, these are the animals that we have the closest relationship with. These are essentially ghosts in our world. These are the animals that are hidden off in the countryside in factories like these. We think of them, if we think of them at all, we think of them in parts. We think of them as wings instead of chickens. We keep them in factories like these. These last 2 photos were photographed in Sweden, by the way. I do work in Sweden. I do investigative work here quite a bit. And again, we think of them in parts. We think of them as leather, or we think of them as milk. We don't think of them as cows. And we think of them as fur trim or as coats, not as foxes. This is a red fox at a fox farm. This photo was taken in Sweden as well during an investigation with Djurrättsorganisationen. And again, we think of them, in parts, not as the whole animal. It would be great if we could close that door, isn't it? Can someone volunteer to close the door? Thank you. And we think of them as wallets, we think of them as purses, but not as alligators. This is actually an alligator factory farm. This is something that actually happens. And sometimes we buy a ticket to go and see them in captivity. And in this talk, I'll talk a little bit about our interesting relationship with them, because we love them, in some ways. And so we treat them like this. We love them, so we want to see them. And but what right do we have to do that? And I'll introduce you to some animals who are used in research. I was undercover in Southeast Asia while I was taking these pictures. This is at a lab for macaque monkeys. My goal, everything I'm trying to do, is to get us to look and to not turn away, which is very, very difficult, as you all know. I think it's difficult because we're innately compassionate. I do believe that. We're good. I think that it's hard to look at these images because it hurts us, but it's doubly hard because to look at this cruelty is to look at our complicity in this cruelty. I mean, even if we're vegans, it's impossible to, live a completely pure lifestyle. And, this just got louder, didn't it? There you are, hello. Didn't even know you were behind me there. And that's why it's so hard to get people to publish these images and to look at these images. I guess they can't close that door. Yeah. Okay, got it. Thank you. Now, you've seen some painful pictures here already in this presentation. And so we're not just, I don't just photograph animals in factory farms, animals in labs. I photograph animals who've been rescued from these industries as well. Just as people are really moved by the photos of cruelty, people are also moved by the stories of rescue, like Large Marge here. She lives at Farm Sanctuary. And like Nilla, short for Vanilla. You can see here she's soaking for a pedicure. So cute. These are cotton-top tamarins, and they have been rescued. They were used for a decade in research. They have tattoos all over their chest. And they've just been rescued. They're allowed out into this is at Jungle Friends in the US, and they have all these pathways that they're in right now that they can run around in through the forest. And I just love this picture because it looks like they were caught in the act. And in this presentation, I'll introduce you to animals who are used in bear bile farming, bears who are used, and we'll introduce you to some animals who've been rescued from the bear bile industry. This is Arcte, and she's a Malayan sun bear, and they actually use the tops of their paws as plates. This is incredibly cute. And I'll introduce you to some gorillas who've been rescued from the bushmeat trade. And at the end, introduce you to some wonderful people who are making the world a better place for animals. But a little bit of context here. For all of you who are documenting animal rights, who are documenting cruelty, doing investigations, writing, blogging, keep your work in context. What you're doing is incredibly important. What you're doing is historical. And the things that we're writing, the things that we're shooting are going to be images like this, images that have shaped history and that everyone remembers. Images make the atrocity of war personal. I refer to myself sometimes as a war photographer. It's not to bring attention to me, but to bring attention to the fact that I believe that there is a war on animals. And images connect us with one another. They galvanize the masses. They create conversations internationally. And what better example? I mean, I've shown some historical examples here, but what better example than this image? This happened this year, and this is an image that has transformed the conversation internationally about refugees. So when you're doing, this work, this kind of work that I do as well, please keep in mind that it's very, very important. Images hold us accountable. Images are proof. This is the inside of a tractor trailer. The cows had just come out of it. The most powerful weapon in the world, as far as I'm concerned, is the camera, said Captain Paul Watson, and I could not agree more. And a bit of background about me. How did I become an animal rights photojournalist? It's a very specific sort of niche market thing that I'm doing here. This is me with Gulliver. This is Gulliver looking down at me. I wish that I was lying around in the dirt all the time, photographing animals. I'm not. Well, you know, I started out because I'm naturally curious about the world, and I mean, a lot of people here love the camera. It's a wonderful tool. It's a tool into the lives of others, and it's a tool that satisfies our curiosity and creates memories. And this tool allowed me to glimpse and document the lives of others. So before I was doing animal work, I was, so this chart, on the left is what people think photographers do: take pictures, travel to exotic locations, and party like rock stars. But in fact, what we do is, we're sitting at our desks, we're editing, we're invoicing, we're doing outreach and social media. So essentially, this is actually what I'm doing most of the time. But luckily, I do get to travel, and I was doing humanitarian work before I was doing animal rights work. And I've been to India 3 times, and this is one of the stories I follow, the Tibetan Children's Village. It's a really wonderful place up in the north. And it's a great place, but they don't have a lot of money. The kids have to take part in everything all day. They cook all of their own meals. That's what they're doing here. They have to clean the classrooms in the morning. In this picture, they're doing a very bad job of cleaning the windows. And they live in rooms 18 to 20 per room. And isn't it crazy that David Beckham is there even up in northern India? And the kids unfortunately, they get boiled dough and coffee for breakfast. It's a good place, but they don't have a lot of money, so this is how the kids are fed. And this is a 5-year-old having her coffee, and this is what happens when you give coffee to children. Now, when I'm doing presentations with youth, I say, okay, so what is missing from these pictures? And they say animals and color and adults. But it is a trick question. What is missing from these images is my intention at the time. I was traveling around the world, having a great time, documenting, taking photos for me, for my career, for my enjoyment, and taking pictures is the word I want to focus on here. What I learned is that through taking pictures, I could give back. And so with these images of the orphanage, instead of doing it just for me, I went back home to Toronto and had an exhibit of the images, and all the money that was raised from the exhibit went back to the orphanage. And that's when things really started to change for me. I realized, this camera, this precious tool, can be a tool for activism. And people often say, well, are you an activist? Are you a photographer? I mean, I'm both for sure, but probably even more an activist, because the reason I'm taking pictures is to help change the world and to help give instead of take. And someone asked me, one of my mentors said, well, I was looking for stories, and I was thinking at the time of going to Afghanistan, and he said, no, like, that's not you. Do what you love. What do you love most in the world? And it was around that time that I realized that I could combine my 2 loves, which was photography and animals. And I don't just have a love for animals, I have a concern for animals. And I realized that I could, shoot from a place of empathy and tell stories of animals, these invisible animals in our lives. Because, a lot of photographers are photographing the elephants and pets, but what about the pigs? What about the animals we eat? What about the animals used in labs? So, first and foremost, We Animals is about bearing witness, because people, even if they're slightly curious, they're not going to go to the farms, they're not going to look inside transport trucks and meet the individuals along the way. National Geographic said, photography is a weapon against what's wrong out there. It's bearing witness to the truth. And again, not just the sad stories, but the stories of rescue. This is Julia, and if you've seen the ghost in our machine, is this better if I, yeah? Yeah, okay, thank you. This is, it's so loud in my ears, I have to adjust. This is Julia, and if you've seen the ghosts in our machine, you've heard her story. She was about to give birth at a factory farm, and she wouldn't move from one crate to the next, and one of the farm workers was really frustrated and beat her almost to death with an electric prod with a metal bar. And actually, some other people who worked at that farm called the authorities. And the farm sanctuary came, the SPCA came, And actually with some gentle coaxing and some soft words, she did get up on her own, but they were able to rescue her, and she did walk onto the transport truck. And when she got to Farm Sanctuary, she gave birth to 16 piglets. I think pigs only have 14 nipples, so can you imagine? And here she was, like, you know, half dead from the beating, and 16 piglets, and a very traumatized girl. But because she had all this love and help around the clock, help and bottle feeding, she went from being a very traumatized animal to this animal. This was only a few weeks later. And you can see her piglets in the background, and she's coming up to me to say hi and to sniff and to grunt. It's really lovely. You know, I also photograph insects. You know, I think that all animals who are sentient deserve our consideration. And I actually start the We Animals book with this photo, and I'll read you a short excerpt from the book. I decided to begin this book with a beetle because when we think about our connection to non-human animals, most of us bring to mind mammals, birds, and perhaps fish rather than insects. If we give them any thought at all, it's as carriers of disease and as creepy crawlies, the stuff of nightmares and metamorphoses, of swarms and bites and ticks. Insects are our most invisible as well as our most constant companions. As with so much of our knowledge of the natural world, we're only now beginning to get a glimpse into the complexity of these animals. In 2013, scientists in Sweden published a paper presenting evidence that dung beetles chart their progress at night by orienting themselves to the Milky Way. It's wonderful to think that beetles, like us, might look into the heavens for answers as to where they're going. It's humbling to realize that they've been doing it for much, much longer than we have. This insect lives alone in his terrarium. Like many animals in confinement, he spends much of his time circling his tank, feeling his way along the walls, looking for a way out. Now, I do photograph internationally, but I don't really need to because there are animal issues everywhere. Everywhere you can just look, you can walk down the street, and there they are. This is a festival in Toronto called Woofstock, and they have a stupid dog trick contest. And what his stupid dog trick is to put his dog's entire head in his mouth. And you know, I wanted to shoot this in a way that showed, you know, close-up of the animal and made us connect with the animal. I'm not sure if the photo achieves that, but you know, I wasn't down in the audience photographing up with the rest of the people. I got onto the stage, and you know, this is very much a social commentary, this picture, because look at how everyone's having a really great time. And this is what I mean by animals are invisible. You know, people are caught up in the stupid dog trick, they're caught up in the music and the excitement, and everyone's having a good time. But is the dog having a good time? It's so incredible that animals who are in plain view, as is this animal, is totally overlooked. And this happens time and time again with animals in entertainment. The animals are front and center. So I try and reframe to show that animals are someone, not something. In most countries in the world, animals, as you know, are considered property, the same as a chair or a car. And here is another animal, front and center, being manhandled by all the tourists in Florida. But when, you know, you can see that his face is taped up, and when he's not being held, he's just put back in a box on the ground. And, you know, people are so wrapped up in their own experiences that they're not bearing witness or noticing or caring that about the very animal that they're holding in their hands. It's just incredible. Reframing to look at who we eat, not what we eat. We Animals is about making us question what is normal, like going to a circus, going to a rodeo, going to a zoo, and trying as much as possible to show the situation from the perspective of the non-human animal. I give photo workshops, and this is one of the main images that I show. This and the following image. People want to know about how to do really good animal portraits, and I think what's super important is to show two things: context and connection. Quite often when we're taking pictures, we take them from human vantage point down here, you know, an animal that's over there. So what I tell people is just to get down and get close. If you're connecting with the animal is going to look at you, and so the rabbit's looking at me, and therefore the rabbit is looking at everyone in this audience. So important. And showing context as well, and a wide angle is really good for that. You know, this photo needs no explanation. You see what the animal is going through, and you see the circumstance. And the same thing goes with this image. She's 20 years old, she's 20 minutes old. She just took her first steps. She's wet from birth, and you can see, you know, we're connecting with her, but we're also seeing where she's going to spend the rest of her life. And what we see and what we're shown in life is so often the surface of things, and that's the problem with, you know, it's how we get caught up in zoos and circuses and these places where animals are used in entertainment. This is Luke, and he's performing, and people are screaming and laughing and having a great time listening to the music and watching the show. But what goes on with Luke behind the scenes? He's tied up, I've met him several times, he's always chained up, he's transported alone in these trucks. And in this picture you can see a hose just down on the bottom right, and he was swaying back and forth in boredom, and he was reaching and straining for that hose, and then he finally got his trunk on it, and he was happy just for a few seconds there until people saw that he was playing with the hose and they took it away from him, and he resumed his swaying back and forth. And this image is also an interesting social commentary. Look at the people in the background. Like, can you imagine being that close to an elephant and, you know, just having a conversation amongst yourselves like it's no big deal that there's this incredible animal right there next to you? That's interesting. I've always dreamed of running away and joining the jungle. My work looks at cognitive dissonance. This is defined as the inconsistency between one's beliefs and one's actions. This is my poster boy for cognitive dissonance. He's about 5 or 6 years old, and I was photographing at a bullfighting training school in Spain. And I asked this little boy, why do you want to be a bullfighter? And he said, because I love bulls. And this is so often the case in our relationship with animals. We've seen lots of campaigns that say, why love one but eat the other? And this next image is terrible, but I think it actually accurately conveys a lot of what we do. We love some animals, and we just absolutely turn a blind eye to all of the others. And we love them, so we want to be with them. We have, you know, this, what is it called, like nature deficit disorder. And, you know, we want to be with animals, but we do it all wrong. We enslave them in the swim with dolphins industry, like here. And I include this picture. It breaks my heart because the dolphin lives in this lagoon on the one side of the hotel, but on the other side of the hotel is the dolphin's natural habitat. And so we want to swim with them, we want to see them in captivity so that we can feel something. You know, it's not about them, it's actually about us. And so we take animals like this Humboldt penguin, who lives in groups of tens of thousands in the south usually, but we take them and we put them, you know, just one in a mall in Thailand. Or we put them in tanks like these. This is at Marineland in Canada, and her name is Kiska. And Kiska was caught, she was wild caught off the coast of Iceland, I guess about 40 years ago now. And so, I mean, that breaks my heart when they catch them wild, because they've known freedom. You know, it's different than when they've just been born there, which is also bad. But she was caught with 5 others. They all died. She was put in this tank. She was impregnated 5 times, gave birth 5 times. All the babies died. And this is her life. And it takes her about 1 minute to circumnavigate this tank that we've put her in. And the only natural thing in that tank is that rock at the bottom. And yet, you know, look at us, we're pointing at her, we're marveling at her for her beauty, but what are we actually seeing? What we're doing is taking away an experience for ourselves and just leaving her behind. She's always left behind. And my work looks at speciesism as well, the assumption of human superiority, which leads to the exploitation of animals. It's also really great to talk about speciesism with kids in schools because they know isms like sexism and racism, maybe ableism and classism, but they don't know about speciesism. So humane education and talking about this issue is really, really important. And I think this is a fantastic painting by Paul Kaczynski that shows, not only, showing the hierarchy not only of ourselves, but of the animals that we, place in that hierarchy. I'm sure you all recognize this woman, Dr. Jane Goodall, and she said very famously, "Only if we understand can we care, and only if we care will we help." And I couldn't agree more. So, there are a lot of antidotes to helping animals. I'll introduce you to some sanctuary work and some sanctuary inhabitants because they're easy to photograph. It's not like sanctuaries are the #1 antidote, but here's Jean and Opie. And Jean was speaking here just this week, actually. And Jean rescued Opie from a dead pile. Opie was 6 weeks old. He was dying, not dead, so they put him on a pile of dead animals and left him there. But Jean was doing an investigation and found Opie, put him in his car, and actually bottle fed him for about 3 months. And Opie lived for 16 years at Farm Sanctuary. And about this picture as well, people don't know that we can have this kind of relationship with animals. We don't see them, we live in cities, and sanctuaries are great places to support and to visit because we can meet animals like Dino here. And Dino had been kept for meat in someone's basement for a bunch of months, and they were growing him until he was big enough to eat, but they liked him. And he had this great smile. And anyway, they eventually couldn't kill him, which is wonderful, and so they brought him to Farm Sanctuary. How many of you know Esther the Pig? She lives near me in Toronto, just near Toronto. And Steve and Derek, her dads, had adopted a pot-bellied pig, or what they thought was a pot-bellied pig. Those are very popular right now. But she was a full-blown, big pig, factory farm pig. And she grew quickly, but it was amazing, their transformation, because they were meat eaters. They thought, oh, how cute, we'll buy this little animal. But as Esther grew, she fit in with all the dogs and played with the dogs and became a family member. Derek and Steve became vegan. They started a sanctuary, and now they're huge international advocates for animals. And this is Vinger, did I say it right, in Denmark. This is Lena, she rescues hens. And sanctuaries are places where, they care so much about all the individuals that they even build wheelchairs for chickens. And a lot of people think this is crazy, but of course, I think it's the right thing to do because she gets around. This is Rosie, and she has a neurological disorder and can't get around without the help of the wheelchair. And so, she stayed inside at night, and they'd put her in her wheelchair during the day, and she could push herself around and peck at the grass and, have a nice life. Interestingly, this is Cinco de Mayo, that's her boyfriend on the right. And he has a disability as well. He has no feet, and his feet have to be taped up in the morning, his little stumps. And he's very protective of Rosie. Isn't that interesting? And so when I was taking this picture, I was crouching down low in the grass, crawling towards her to get the picture, and he hopped over defensively. You can see he's leaning into her. He's saying, "What are you doing talking to my woman?" And Otto is a fur farm escapee, and maybe some of you have been to her sanctuary in Finland. And she's clicker training him. I just took this picture a few months ago. She's clicker training him so that she can cut his nails and give him his vaccinations and stuff like that. It's a beautiful place. I don't know who he is, but he needed to be included in the slideshow. But he does live at Edgar's Mission in Australia, which is a wonderful place to visit and to volunteer. And the motto at Edgar's Mission is, if we could live happy and healthy lives without harming others, why wouldn't we? And it's a great quote to keep in your back pocket for people who are questioning you if you're vegan or vegetarian. They're questioning you about, how and why you do things. Just throw this at them, and it's really hard to argue with, actually. Another antidote is to acknowledge the overlap of oppressions and working in solidarity with others to improve the lives of all. Because animal abuse is often human abuse, labor violations. I spent a night at this place, this factory farm in Spain, and every single one of those men was paid under the table and very poorly paid, and every single one of them asked me if I could help get them another job anywhere. They didn't want to be doing this work, and they too were abused in this job with the low pay and the long hours. Animal abuse is also environmental abuse. Lakes are being destroyed, waterways are being destroyed because of the pollution caused by mink farming. This is outside of a mink farm in Canada, and this is at a mink farm in Sweden. Melanie Joy said, and I love this, progressive social change requires not simply liberating specific groups, but challenging the foundations of oppression itself. And if we build community with those who are oppressed, everyone's lives can improve. This was a wonderful shoot that I did with the Humane Society International recently. Instead of them going to a community and saying like, here we are, these white people, we're gonna fix your problem. They went to the community and said, what help do you need in regards to animals? And they said, we do have an overpopulation problem with the dogs, and let's work together to do a spay and neuter clinic. And over 100 dogs were taken and adopted out from this place, and I think about 300 dogs were spayed and neutered as well. And in this picture, these are kids, these are local kids who are helping round up street dogs and bringing them into the clinic for spay, neuter, and vaccinations. Part of what I do is put a face to the billions of animals we consume each year. Billion is a number that we can't feel, we can't understand. Humane Society International estimates that 72 billion land animals were raised and killed for food in 2014. This photo was taken in Italy just a few weeks ago. And according to the Swedish Board of Agriculture, 90 million animals are killed for food here each year. About this photo, I try and actually go to a lot of farms that are considered humane, free-ranging, organic, family-run, etc., because I want to see what's going on there too. We know the big places are bad, but what are the small places like? I don't want people to feel too comfortable about eating these animals either, because these are the conditions. This farm has all of those titles: free-range, etc., organic, family-run. And these are the conditions that the animals live in. And unfortunately, these statistics that these numbers that I'm sharing, they never include the sea animals. And so about this billions, these numbers that are in the billions, it's important for me to go to these farms and show the staggering numbers of animals who are crammed into these places, but we can't feel these individuals. So again, it's important just to get down and get close and spend a whole evening there and showing the individuals. So here are 2,500 turkeys, and here is one of those 2,500 turkeys. This was also photographed in Sweden a few years ago, and a big campaign actually came out about this place. I don't remember the name of the farms. But a billion isn't a billion is 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. So speaking of these individuals, here is a beautiful story about a farmer who decided he had a change of heart ethically. He no longer wanted to participate in the killing of animals. He had 3,000 hens, and instead of killing them, he wanted to send them to sanctuary. And so he contacted sanctuaries throughout the US and said, can you take my 3,000 birds? Which of course, almost no one could do. Some sanctuaries took 10, some took 50, and one farm took 1,000. One sanctuary took 1,000. And this was on the West Coast, but a lot of these birds had to be flown over to the East Coast. And that's what's happening here. The plane has arrived. Some unknown benefactor has donated an entire charter flight to bring 1,100 birds over to the East Coast. And we don't know who this benefactor is, but we refer to them lovingly as the henefactor. So the henefactor's plane arrived, overnight flight, and everyone's nervous and wondering how the chickens are doing. So from 3,000 to 1,100, and then the door opens and there's 10 in each cage, and I love their arms reaching up. Everyone's just so excited to get their hands on these birds. And then this is the first time they're standing on grass. This is a farm sanctuary as well. And one by one, they're released. And they're all given medical attention, vaccinations, sub-Q fluids if they're dehydrated. Their nails are super long because they've only ever stood on caging their entire lives. And they all had mites, and so they were given a dust bath to get rid of the mites. And here is one. Here is one of the 3,000, one of the billions. And this is Sunny. You've met him if you've seen the Ghost in Our Machine. We were at some sale yards in the US, and he was born there, which breaks my heart because it was his mother who was there to be auctioned off for dog meat or something. She was a dairy cow, and she would have been between 3 and 6 years old. And she gave birth at the auction yards, and he wouldn't stand up, so he was considered a downer, and so they were gonna trash him or sell him for $5. He was very anemic, and Farm Sanctuary said, can we have him? And because he was worth nothing, they gave him to Farm Sanctuary. And you know, unlike other animals who remain wary of humans because they've been so traumatized by us, he's only ever known love. You know, he's just been born, he's on his way to the vet clinic. He spent 48 hours there where he was given a blood transfusion and so much care. And this is him 6 months later. And this is him, I love him so much. This is him a year later, so super comfortable with people. And this is him 2 years later with me. And this is how he treats humans. When he sees you, he comes up to you and he cuddles. It's just an incredible experience. Now we're going to go over to Africa. This is a story called Rachel's Promise. And this is Khan Daniel, a gorilla who's about 8 years old. Now, Rachel's Promise. Rachel went to Africa as a volunteer many years ago. She wanted to volunteer at a sanctuary, and she had dedicated 3 months to doing so. But the sanctuary was not well run and needed a lot of help. 3 months became 6 months, became a year, and at that point she had taken in tons of these baby gorillas who'd been rescued from the bushmeat trade, and they didn't have a proper place to keep them. So her promise to them, to these very gorillas you're seeing in this picture, was that she would not rest until she could build a proper sanctuary home for them. Now, my trip to visit that sanctuary coincided with the fulfillment of her promise. They kept acquiring land. They were bringing in tons of primates who needed help. They have about, I think, 400 primates at this place. And she had finally built a 200-acre forest enclosure for these gorillas. And this is the day before they were going to move. And so she's spending time with them. Pretty special. It's not something that really any of us can or should do, actually. But because she raised them, she has this relationship with them. And she doesn't know how much time she's ever going to get to spend with them after this day. So she's really enjoying it to the max. And this is her with Shay. He's 8 years old, and he's definitely too big to be on his mom's back. And it's so funny that he's holding her boob, isn't it? So the next morning they had to sedate each gorilla one by one. And Rachel was a typical worried mama. And each gorilla went to the vet clinic where they got vaccinations, had their teeth checked, and just made sure that they were in good shape for the move. And then while they were still sedated, they were brought to the new enclosure, except for Picken. Picken woke up in the truck. Now, never get in a car with a gorilla. Very, very dangerous thing to do. I should not have been in that front seat at all taking pictures. But luckily, she was in the arms of her caretaker, Apollinaire, and she woke up and she was woozy and she, looked around a bit, but she, of course she had never been in a car before. But she looked around and she didn't freak out, thank goodness. She just looked around for a minute and went back to sleep. And Rachel was in the new satellite cage, which is attached to the new area. And she was there with all of them as they woke up from sedation to make sure that, make sure that they weren't scared and make sure they saw her and knew that they were okay. And she spent 2 days in there with them, just letting them get accustomed to their new surroundings before letting them out into the forest enclosure. And then that day came. And she didn't know if they would be too afraid to go out or not. And she pulled the cage open, and to her great joy, they went out into the forest, one by one by one. They waited for each other, they put their arms around each other, and then off they went, running into the forest to explore. And in this picture, the gorillas were running into the forest, and she was running after them, and I was running after her, taking pictures. And she stopped and she had a good cry, and she, threw up her arms and said, "Okay, God, you can take me now. I'll die happy." But she did not die. She's still there working really hard, and it's actually a wonderful place to volunteer. It's called Ape Action Africa. And before we move on to Asia, I just want to introduce you to a few more primates that I've met around the world. This is Mandy. Mandy, she was kept in a lab her whole life, but her paperwork didn't go back far enough for anyone to know whether she was born in the wild or in captivity. The way you find out is that when the animals are brought to sanctuary, if they're too afraid to go outside, it's because they've never known, they've never known freedom, they've never known the outdoors. But if they run out into the sanctuary, it's because they know what the outdoors is like. And so this is that moment where she's been removed from the lab where she has spent decades. And she goes out they open the door and she goes out into the grass and she's touching everything and she's feeling the wind in her face, and that's when this picture was taken. And this is Pepsi. He's unique not only for those incredible golden eyes that he has, but because he has a foot fetish. And so chimpanzees and so many animals are just like us. They have quirks just like we do. And this is after his rescue. He's living in a sanctuary, and I was being toured around this place. It's called Save the Chimps. And he saw me, and I was the new girl, and so there was some new feet to look at. And so he started hooting at me and pointing at my feet, and the woman touring me around said, "Oh, just show him your feet. He's been in captivity for decades. It's the least you can do, show him your feet." So I took my shoes off, and he was very impressed. And the woman who was touring me around Save the Chimps is named Dr. Carol Noon. She passed away a few years ago. But she was quite a reclusive woman, didn't want her picture being taken. But she did like this picture because it's not her face, it's her hand. And she liked this picture because she's on the inside of the cage, and the chimpanzee she rescued is on the outside of the cage. And what I mean by that is that at Save the Chimps, they've devised this incredible architecture to keep the chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are top-heavy with short legs. They're afraid of water. They'll never try and swim. So what they did is they built 5-acre islands with moats. And so that's where they live. They can go inside, which is where she is, but they can live outdoors and play in trees and climb on structures. It's a really incredible place. So now we're going to go over to Asia, and I'll introduce you to some bears. This is Maya. She's just been rescued from the bear wild trade. She's about 5 years old. And so why do bears need rescuing? Unfortunately, it is still practiced. Bear bile is used in traditional Chinese medicine. Less and less so, thank goodness. But for centuries, bears have been kept in conditions like these, and worse. Tens of thousands of bears, maybe even hundreds of thousands of bears. And so their gallbladders are tapped monthly for the bile, and the bile is used. This bile, it does have effective properties, it does have anti-inflammatory properties, but we've been able to replicate this synthetically in many, many ways. So there's no reason to treat bears like this at all. There are a lot of sanctuaries cropping up, and they're rescuing bears. Maybe some of you follow Free the Bears or the Animals Asia Foundation. And so I've worked with these two groups. And this is Animals Asia rescuing a bear that they named Miracle. And Miracle lived in this cage for 8 years. And so she's arriving at her new home here. And I include this picture because it shows not only where she lived her whole life, but where she's going to spend the rest of her life, which is that beautiful background. That's the sanctuary. And so, like with the gorillas, they had to sedate her in order to move her. You can see how traumatized her body is. Those are calluses on the top of her head from rubbing her head back and forth against the bars her whole life in frustration. And you can see the state that her paws are in from standing on cage floor her whole life. And it was so moving to see just how lovingly they moved her out of the cage and into the operating room, where she spent hours and hours, as all the bears do. They do an ultrasound, look at their gallbladder, they treat their paws, they treat their eyes and their ears. You can see the shape that her nails are in and the cracks in her feet. You can even see a bar line on her heel there. Now, she was slowly introduced to the other families of bears, and this is her 3 years later. She was, again, she went from being a very traumatized animal to being what it was described as. She ate the most, she had the most friends, and she stayed out the longest. And I mean, of course, these bears can't be, put out into the wild because they wouldn't cope and because they would just be poached, unfortunately. So they build these huge, huge sanctuaries, and the bears are very happy there. When they get released out in the morning, they all run for their favorite hammocks, and they get toys just the way our dogs and cats get toys to play with. And they get to, pose for pictures and play the upright bass. And they get to sit around and contemplate life. Bears are my favorite, give me a break. I can show pictures of bears all day. Now this picture is lying to you. This is actually not a depressed bear. I don't know his name, but I know his story. He was used for bear bile farming for 4 years, and then when he started producing quote-unquote lower quality bile, they further abused his body by cutting off his front paws for bear paw soup. After that, he was not killed. He was rescued. He was rescued by Free the Bears in Cambodia, and that's where I took this picture. And he has a whole sanctuary to play in, and he could be with the bears, but for some reason, he prefers to be with the humans, so he stays indoors. And in this picture, he's pacing back and forth in front of the cage, giving me that sad face because he's begging for his favorite treat, which is pineapple jam. And so I was being a little bit careless, and I was stepping closer and closer to the cage, taking these pictures, and he grabbed me. I mean, bears are so incredibly fast, and he grabbed me, and he pulled me against the bars. And in that moment, I mean, he could have broken my bones, he could have bitten me, but he didn't. He was just playing. And in that moment, I was in this bear hug, but I was being held by his stumps. And he didn't hurt me, and he was so forgiving, and he wants to be with humans. And he is one of the animals that I keep with me, in my chest forever and ever, because he reminds me if they can be like this, then we owe them so much. We owe them so much. Now, people often want to know how I do what I do, and sometimes, truthfully, I ask a farm or a slaughterhouse, or tell them rather that I'm a photojournalist and I think that people should know where the food comes from, and they agree and they give me a tour, but that's not usually the case. For the most part, I'm working with security teams around the world, investigators, and we go into a farm and we shoot all night, and we leave everything undisturbed, and we come out with images, important images that are educating people and changing the world. And so I did that in Southeast Asia as well, at a lab. I think I'm going over my time limit, so I'm going to scoot ahead and skip a few stories here. Oh, do I? Okay, thanks. This is me at a pig farm just recently in Italy. And so what we do is we go in and we just go up and down, and we meet the animals, meet the individuals, and photograph them, and document the injuries and document the conditions so that we can know. This image was shot in Spain, but I mean, this is how pigs who are castrated without anesthetic look. This is what happens in most parts of the world. And if we think of animals at all, we might think of, if we're eating this bacon sandwich, we might think of a pig on a farm, but we don't think of all the things that happen to them during their lives. When they're piglets, I'm not sure if they get their tails docked in this country, but in most parts of the world, tails are docked, teeth are cut, ears are tagged, vaccinations are given, castrated without anesthetic, all within the first 6 to 8 weeks of their lives. I mean, we don't know these things. We don't think about them, and we so need to know so that we can make more compassionate choices. And this is at a farm in Sweden. They're just such smart, lovely animals. Like, probably most of you know that pigs are as smart as 3-year-olds, and definitely smarter than our cats and dogs. And so, this is what I spend months of my life doing, is showing these places, showing the conditions in which they live, showing the injuries they suffer because of this sort of closed confinement and the stress that they endure, so they fight. This is also in Sweden. Can you believe this? And exposing these issues time and time again in different countries, over and over and over, so that we can see the individual instead of seeing them as a product, seeing them as something instead of someone, and just showing how they live and showing how they die. And I photograph children with animals quite often. It's so interesting, isn't it? Because kids are so compassionate. They're the ones who are going to say at a zoo, like, oh, you know, is that gorilla sad? Or, you know, ask questions that we tend not to answer. And this little girl was so enjoying the company of this greyhound for a moment. But no one told her, I was standing right there, and no one told her that, you know, if this animal doesn't run fast enough, the animal will eventually be destroyed. And about animals, again, going back to animals being invisible in plain view of everyone, this is such a great example with animals in entertainment and bullfights. I mean, the animal is the center of the picture, and yet no one's really seeing the individual. They're just seeing the artistry of the matador. They're hearing the music and, you know, waving their white flags. And this is, you know, it just it blows my mind. I don't know why we don't see. I guess we've all been raised, you know, from a young age to just not see, just to overlook. And so again, that is my job, just getting us to look and to not turn away. Now just to wrap up, words into actions, it's my favorite part of the presentation. And I think, as we all know, the best way to avoid being overwhelmed by a problem is to become part of the solution. And it's so important to do all sorts of kinds of activism, but also to attack the root of a problem. And one of the major problems is our overconsumption and our consumption of animals. So we can literally eat our way to a revolution, and we know we can do that here. I mean, look what we're here celebrating. It's a veg fest, and there's, you know, in other words, eat your veggies. Damn it. This is Prince, and he ate that entire head of celery. He wasn't just playing, like he really wanted that thing. That's Prince. And we know that we can eat, you know, delicious gourmet food now, and it's a great way to educate others, is to give other people really, really good, tasty vegan food. This is vegan. This is a Reuben sandwich. I mean, there's no excuse anymore, right, to be eating animals. These are cheeses. These are vegan cheeses. Anyway, you get my point. It's a really, really simple thing we can all do, is to eat less and to eat differently, and to do it joyfully as well. And I tell people, you know, now you know what I do to make the world a better place. I take pictures, but what can we all do? We can use our skills. Do what you like to do what you know, do what you're good at, because you'll have longevity in that work, and you'll care more, and you'll get more fulfillment out of it. And my example is Dr. Melissa Amarello. She was finishing her master's. She was doing behavioral studies on snakes. This is one of her snakes, and rattlesnake. And when she was done, her advisor said, okay, well, now that you're going on to your PhD, you can kill these snakes and move on. But at that point, and these are her words, she said, I realized after all this time that snakes didn't need another scientist, they needed an advocate. And so she took the knowledge that she had gained, and she started an organization called Social Snakes. And she didn't kill her snakes. She brought them home, they live in terrariums, and they get outdoor time every single day. And that's what you're seeing here in this picture. And we can build compassionate communities and bring humane education to schools. It's so important to speak to young honestly and compassionately, and to, I don't know how much humane education is growing here in this country, actually, but it's really, really big in North America. And I'm in schools talking to kids all the time. And we can do things like speak up at City Hall. This was when they were trying to pass a ban on shark fin products in Canada, and they did so successfully. And this is an easy one. A lot of easy ones here that we all know. We can volunteer, and we can adopt instead of buy. This might seem like an ordinary sort of picture, you know, a dog in a car, no big deal. But what makes this picture interesting is that she was born and raised in a lab. She's 1 year old, and this is her rescue, essentially. She's, for the first time in a car, she's first time with her family, and she's on her way home. Are there a lot of puppy mills in Sweden? Any hands if you know, if it's in the affirmative, negative? It's a huge problem in North America, and you know, we see dogs in the store windows, and we see the puppies, and they're so cute, but who are the parents? And these are the parents. They live in places like these, and so people need to know that if you're buying a dog, this is usually the sort of place they're coming from. And to all the photographers out there, there's a movement towards taking great pictures to make animals adoptable at shelters. And Like who would want to adopt the dog on the left, right? Nobody. There's no reason to post that sort of picture if that dog's up for adoption. People aren't going to want, they're going to see like, oh, that's a huge investment of time. But if we take really nice pictures of animals available for adoption, the success rate in North America for animals who have a nice picture of them, the success rate for adoption of that animal within 1 week is 100%. Pretty awesome. And we can avoid tourism that involves the use and abuse of animals. We can support sanctuaries and rescue efforts instead of zoos and aquaria. And we can bear witness and report back on what we've seen. We can report cruelty. The short story is that because concerned neighbors made the appropriate phone calls to report that this dog was living outside, he was rescued and he was eventually living with a happy home. And this is also a really easy one if you want to talk to people about, people who love animals but still want to use them. This is low-hanging fruit. You can encourage people to just buy a cruelty-free logo because you're not even asking them to not shampoo their hair or not brush their teeth. You're just asking them to use a different product. Really, really easy. And we can protest, of course. And we can protest with humor. The sign says, "Get me the cluck out of here." And we can get involved in direct action. This is at the Foxhound Sabotage in the UK, and because the Sabs were out that day, no foxes were killed. And this was at a sort of a media stunt recently, a DXE in Toronto. And what they did is they blockaded the slaughterhouse, animals coming into the slaughterhouse. So for 2 hours, they blockaded, which of course it didn't rescue those animals ultimately, but what it did was create a media sensation. And they were very savvy about media and getting some of the major newspapers there and getting a conversation happening. And we can raise funds. This is so important. We can raise funds for organizations. If you don't know what to do, if you're not sure what your skills are or how you want to help animals, you can help raise money for organizations who do know what they're doing and who need your support. In this photo, the short story is that I raised enough money through my animal work in India to give it to this organization on the right, Dr. Debbie, and I sent them enough money to buy that ambulance. And that's an ambulance that they use to collect animals, spay, neuter, and put them back where they were found. And for the photographers out there, or people using images in their campaigns, it really is important to show humans in the images as well, because you know how we inhabit images. We see ourselves in photos. People will look at this man and say, wow, like I want to do what he's doing. And we do that in films, and we do that in romance films and like love songs. You know how when you have a heartache, you feel like the love song was written for you. Well, it's the same thing with photos. Like we inhabit them, so it's really important to show humans and animals together and inspire them to seek different possibilities. And as a matter of survival, we have to choose hopefulness. And people always ask me, like, how do you do what you do? And what I do is incredibly depressing, but I've learned over a decade of doing this, I've learned to not get in the mental rut of, thinking of the disastrous situation we've created for animals around the world. If I think about it all the time, I'm not going to be effective. So I choose, it's an active choice, I choose to focus on joy. I choose to focus on change every day so that I can continue this very painful work. And we can celebrate like we're doing today. We're here, we're seeing friends, we're eating delicious food, and we're celebrating change. It's very, very, very important. And that's actually what my next 5-year project is. It's called Unbound. Interestingly, with the animal rights movement, traditionally and historically, it's been made up of 70 to 80% women. And I think that that's worth celebrating. So this 5-year project is about women in the movement all around the world. I'm 1 year into it, and it tells the stories of all these incredible people. And people love heroes, like this is still animal rights work, it's just sort of a sneaky way of doing it. By telling the stories of women, I'm highlighting them, highlighting their work, and getting people excited about being change makers as well. So to wrap up, I said I would tell you about Ron at the end of this presentation, and I'll do just that. Ron, so the records say, so this is the last page of my book, by the way. This is how I tie up the whole book. This is how I tie up the presentations as well. Ron, so the records say, was born on September 1st, 1976. So he's my age, actually, almost 39. No one seems to have any idea whether he was born in the wild or in captivity, or whether he was a pet or a performer. What is recorded is that in '87, he was at the lab for experimental medicine and surgeries in primates, which is LEMSIP for short. Although further records are incomplete, we know that at LEMSIP, Ron was anesthetized 105 times. In 1990, he was sent to the Colston Foundation, where in '97, he was anesthetized 16 times in a 5-week period. The following year, he was part of a 6-month spinal dynamics study where a disc in his neck was removed. The charts state that following the invasive surgery on his spine, Ron was not given medication for 8 days, pain medication. And when he was given pain medication, it was 2 Tylenol. After Save the Chimps bought Colston out in 2002, Ron was one of the remaining chimpanzees who were removed to Save the Chimps' 200-acre sanctuary in Florida. For the length of his time at LEMSIP in Colston, Ron lived in a 5-foot by 5-foot by 7-foot cage suspended above the ground. On occasions, Ron was provided with enrichment, in quotes, terms used by zoos and labs to describe items like blankets, car tires, and foraging balls that animals are given to decrease their boredom and to provide us with the illusion that we're doing something meaningful for their welfare. Although at Save the Chimps, Ron had several acres of his own sanctuary space within which to roam, he usually chose to stay indoors. He'd carefully arrange his blankets in a circle to form a nest. And it was there that he died in October 2011, peacefully but prematurely, a common fate for chimpanzees used in research. Ron's inherent dignity, his individuality, and the gravity of his gaze are shared by many, if not all, of the animals you've met today. It's my hope that, after what Ron and the other beings whom you've encountered in We Animals have undergone and continue to undergo, that we're up to the task of doing the right thing by them and by our conscience. At the very least, we owe Ron and all the others the respect of meeting their eyes and not turning away. So I want to thank everyone here today for looking and for seeing and for not turning away.